Good morning. How's everybody? Pretty good? Glad to see you. And any people who visit with us today, we want you to know how very welcome you are. And if you are looking to find a church that's up and coming, then consider 7th Street Christian Church. And so when we give the invitation later on and you want us to be your home church, then come forward and announce that to all of us. And so our lectionary scripture this morning is from the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 17. And a very interesting text. The Apostle Paul is on his second journey, trying to make Christians of people in the first century Roman Empire, and he comes to one of the greatest and most notorious cities in the history of the ancient world, the great Greek city of Athens. We are right next door to the Greek Orthodox Church, people with one of the long traditions in the history of Christianity, and here is Paul coming to the very center of that ancient Greek world in the first century. And so it's a fairly lengthy text this morning, but stay with me, and I think you'll be rewarded in your understanding of your Christian faith. All right, reading from the 17th chapter, beginning at verse 16 and reading through verse 23. While Paul was waiting in Athens for Silas and Timothy, he was greatly upset when he noticed how full of idols the city was. So he held discussions in the synagogue with the Jews and with the Gentiles who worshipped God, and also in the public square every day with the people who happened to come by. Certain Epicurean and Stoic teachers also debated with him. Some of them asked, "What is this ignorant show-off trying to say?" Others answered, "He seems to be talking about foreign gods." They said this because Paul was preaching about Jesus and the resurrection. So they took Paul, brought him before the city council, that is the Areopagus, and said, "We would like to know what this new teaching is that you are talking about. Some of the things we hear you say sound strange to us, and we would like to know what they mean. For all the citizens of Athens and the foreigners who live there like to spend all their time telling and hearing the latest new thing." Paul stood up in front of the city council and said, "I see that in every way you Athenians are very religious. For as I walked through your city and looked at the places where you worship, I found an altar on which is written, quote, 'To an unknown God.' That which you worship then, even though you do not know it, is what I now proclaim to you." This is a reading from the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 17. Read a newspaper column not long ago in which the writer said, if you want to get a line on people's character, that is, really know who a person is and what that person is like, ask that person what are the 5 things that upset them most easily. What are 5 things that make you maddest? Now I can see that your head's already starting to churn, and you're trying to think of those things. Maybe some things that have already happened in your lives up to this moment on this Sunday. I can think of mine, and I don't know. You probably don't want to hear them, but I mean, just some of the little things. Traffic lights upset me. I don't like traffic lights, at least red ones, when I am the driver. I don't like them at all. I mean, sometimes I will drive a mile out of the way in order to avoid 5 traffic lights. Or I don't like traffic lights because they last too long. There's a traffic light up at the corner of on Brook Road at Bellevue, that if you are on the Bellevue, you sit for what seems like 3 minutes waiting for that light to change. And then the irony is that when I'm going down Brook Road, this light that is so long on Bellevue always catches me when I'm going south on Brook. And then, of course, there's the red light that changes too quickly. I mean, there are 2 cars in front of me, and they go around the corner. If they hesitate just a bit, and they go around the corner, but when I get to the intersection, the light has turned red. And, well, so you see, traffic lights upset me. Now, that's a little thing, isn't it? I mean, goodness gracious, why should anyone be upset over something like that? Let's raise it to a little higher level. When Miriam was singing in choir in one of the interims where we were, she would, when she had to go to choir practice on Thursday night, and I would get home from teaching at university, and she would leave. She would talk to me about what the dinner was going to be. She said, "Now, what you do at 6:30, you put the meatloaf in and the potatoes, and then at 7 you put the eggplant casserole in." And I said, "Okay, I'll take care of it. I'll take care of it." And, so what happens? When she gets home, I have put the eggplant casserole in the oven at 6:30 and the meatloaf at 7, so that when she gets there and we're supposed to sit down and eat, the eggplant casserole is all overdone and crusty, and the meatloaf is soupy. And she says, "Why don't you listen to me?" And so, she's very legitimately upset. And so what are the things that upset you? I mean, there are things that certainly upset you. Well, let's take a look at what upset one of the great figures in the early Christian church, the Apostle Paul. Something that you and I wouldn't even think about in the 21st century, would we? I never think about idols now. I don't know that we run into a lot of idols around the city of Richmond. That is certainly images of gods and goddesses, and see people going up to them. And now you say, well, but there are other kinds of idols, and you're quite right about that. There are other things that people value so highly and spend their lives with or devote themselves to. But for Paul, who was a Jew, and there are 2 things. The 10 Commandments open with, have no other gods but the God, the one God, all throughout the Judaism and down to the present day, one God. Have no other gods before you. And then the second commandment is, don't make any images of God. Well, here, if you have been born and bred with that sort of understanding of God, and the Jews were ancient people who, very different from most of the other religions in their day, worshipped only one God, and they didn't make any representations of that God. But the ancient world in which Christianity was born was filled with that kind of things. There were idols and images all over the empire, and representations of the emperor who represented God on earth. And so when Paul came into Athens and saw all these idols, all these images, he was, as the scripture says, greatly upset. He was angry that these people gave themselves to such physical representations of gods and goddesses. That's not the only thing that upset Paul. If you want to know some serious things that made him angry and upset him, read the writing, read the letter that he wrote to another Greek city and to the Christians who had come into being in that city, the city of Corinth. And so he wrote a letter called 1 Corinthians. And if you leaf through the writing called 1 Corinthians, you will find that he was upset by the divisions that had occurred in that church. People saying, well, I like this preacher, I like that preacher, I like Paul, some say I like Peter, no, I like Apollos, and on they went, and divided the church over such matters. And Paul was greatly upset by that. And he was upset by the lack of organization in the church and how the church seemed to be chaotic. And he says, look, you've got to get your act together. You've got to be structured, and everybody's got to know what they're doing and what their place is and what service they're performing. And we can do this, folks. Let's be unified. He was upset by immorality. There was some very graphic and outstanding cases of people living very disastrously unethical lives in the church. That upset him. He was concerned about how people desecrated the communion service and how they would come in and some people would get there earlier and drink the wine and eat the bread and so on, and there would not be enough for the other people who came in. Terrible, Paul says. And on he went. And finally he said that there were people there who denied that Jesus had been raised from the dead, who denied the resurrection. And Paul said that upset him. And he tried to address all of these things. These were serious matters that upset the Apostle Paul. Well, how about our blessed Lord himself? How about Jesus? Were there things that caused Jesus to be upset? And if you read through the Gospels, you can certainly find numerous incidents in which Jesus became angry about the kinds of things that were going on. And I would say that when you read the things that upset Jesus, that these are some of the kinds of things that really ought to upset us. I mean, it's one thing to get upset about a traffic light or about whether the food is cooked properly. It's quite another thing to be upset about some really serious things. And Jesus was upset about serious things. When Jesus came to the great temple in Jerusalem to worship God and to come there in reverence and in peace and serenity and an attempt to try to find a place where God could really be one with Jesus. Jesus' blessed Father. Here he was, when he approached the temple, he heard all of this clamor, all of this loud noise, and people shouting, and the sound of animal noises and so on, and then the clinking of coins. And here, right at the very entrance into the holy temple where people had come to worship, here were people selling animals to be sacrificed for the worship service and charging huge prices for them. And since people came from various areas and didn't have the right coinage, the right currency to buy these things, here were the people at one stand that changed your money, and they were calling out and they were yelling and all this kind of confusion and chaos on the very doorstep of a place where people were entering in order to find peace and to worship and to learn and to experience the kinds of aspects of God that we sang about in our opening hymn this morning. Jesus was greatly upset by that. He was so upset that he acted in a way that you don't usually associate with Jesus. He turned the tables of the money changers over, and the coins rang all over the place, and he seized one of the whips that was there that was used to control the animals that were being sold, and he drove the money changers and the sellers of sacrificial animals out of the court of the temple. So Jesus got upset about some things. He got upset when people were so insistent upon hard and fast rules to govern their lives that they ignored compassion and kindness. For instance, there were people who came to the temple, and like you and I come to church, who were very careful to give their tithes to the church, but they would give their tithes and they would neglect the care of their mothers or their fathers who lived in poverty and who didn't have enough to eat, and they didn't have adequate housing, transportation, all that kind of thing. And Jesus was very upset with people who insisted upon keeping certain strict religious rules and at the same time forgot human compassion and human kindness. What I'm saying to you this morning is that there are things that probably shouldn't upset you. Again, minor things, small things, but there are things in your life and in our society, in our world, that you ought to get upset about. And not just get upset about them, but then say, what is it I can do to change these things so it is no longer upsetting? Well, certainly you and I living in the city of Richmond, just read in the paper last week that Richmond is designated one of the poverty capitals in the United States. Now that's upsetting, that the city of Richmond should be so noted for its pockets of poverty that it ranks high in poverty. So that's upsetting. What can you and I do about it? Well, fortunately, you people here at 7th Street Christian are doing something about it. You host Caritas, and Liz Hewlett and her committee, they address many of these things that are going on, upsetting things, but you're not simply upset, you attempt to do something about it. If you go back to the Apostle Paul, he got upset, but what did he do? Did he simply internalize it and let it boil over? No, he analyzed the situation. He said, all right, so what can I do? And so what he finally decided to do was to stand up before a group of people who said, we want to hear from you. And he said, I'm going to tell you what upsets me. And I'm going to tell you why it upsets me. And I'm going to tell you what we can do about it. And the Apostle Paul did those things. And when you and I are upset by poverty, by the way in which the drug culture in the city of Richmond has ruined the lives of so many young people, and a society in which it's so difficult for a person who has gotten caught up in something like this to ever find his or her way out of it, and all of the impediments that are put in the way of somebody trying to get his or her life together. The prisons and all of these things ought to upset us. And again, we have agencies that our church supports, which addresses itself. Those agencies address themselves to solving some of these very upsetting things. And so my purpose in today's sermon, based upon this lectionary text this morning in which the Apostle Paul has come to the great city of Athens, things upset him then, things that probably don't enter our minds in the 21st century. But I want you to think about the things around you, in your own life, in your family, in your community, in our society, that legitimately upset us. And what are they? Analyze them. Don't panic. Don't internalize them. Don't let them just kind of ruin your internal life. But just step out and quietly do something about them. I would say that, just give you one final thing, the thing that upsets me is extreme behavior on the left and the right. I am a great champion of moderation. That is, I believe that most of the time, if you go down the middle, if you are, as they said of Queen Elizabeth's reign, when she tried to go between Protestantism on the one side and Catholicism on the other, she kind of went down the middle between the two and resulted in the Church of England or the Episcopal Church in America. Moderation seems to be an answer to many of the evils and upsetting things in our society. Whatever it is, think about the things that upset you, analyze them, ask, how can I change these things? Sometimes all you need to do is change yourself, change the way you approach these things. The traffic lights are going to be red and green out there regardless. I can't do a thing about them, but I can do something about me. I can sit there quietly and think, these lights are not going to bother me anymore, and hope it works the next time. Amen.